Welcome to The Recognized Authority. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott. Today, my guest is Cyan Cooper. And Cyan is somebody who is, I think, a long-time listener to the show and has some really interesting things to say about YouTube because I've been following you, Cyan, on LinkedIn for quite a while. I've been watching your content on there. So Cyan is the co-founder of 100C, which is a full-service YouTube agency that builds channels for business owners who want to grow authority and revenue, and that's something we're going to talk about. So, Cyan, let me ask you, how did you get into the whole YouTube thing? What was it that drew you to YouTube specifically as a channel?
Uh, so from the beginning, when I started my professional career, I always wanted to be at the cutting edge of things. And you're going to ask me a question later that I think is going to go into this, but I started in China, and I was told in college that the cutting edge was going to be globalization, manufacturing, which primarily happened over in China. And then after years of being over there, I realized that that was not the cutting edge of what was taking place in the business community. And I didn't enjoy it. So I came back to the States looking to switch up my industry and do something that was in line with my natural talents, but then also something that I thought was going to be impervious to the changes of the landscape going forward with things like AI and such. And so after starting 100C, which was just a general marketing firm where we did just about everything, I was paying attention to, how do we want to niche down? What do we want to focus on? And YouTube emerged as a medium that's so complex and so creative that no amount, like it will always be something that you can stand out on if you put in the effort. It'll never become commoditized, as like for example, AI. If you have an Instagram channel and you do art, AI art's coming for you. That the same phenomenon isn't happening for YouTube. And a lot of people, especially a lot of businesses, recognize that being effective on YouTube makes them stand out in their industry as an authority. And that, but it's very difficult to do, and they need help doing it. And so it just all those pieces aligned, and we decided to double down on YouTube about 4 years ago, and we've been doing that ever since. Like I was telling you before the call, from sun up to sundown, all we do is make YouTube videos.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think YouTube is really interesting. Technically I've been on it for, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. 2008, I think I had my first video on YouTube. But I'm probably the poster child of not using it effectively. So and that's something I want to talk to you about today, about how people like me and maybe some of the folks who are watching this can use it or are listening to this. Can we get into some of the details then? Because you talked about using it to grow authority, and that's something I talk a lot with people about in the show. Can you talk to me about how you might take somebody, and you can use me as an example if you want, or you can make up a hypothetical if you like. But if you have somebody who wants to grow a YouTube channel, they think that they want to do video. You talked a little bit there about, I think you were kind of hinting at production value and quality and things like that. And maybe some of that kind of talk is scaring away some of the people from YouTube. Can you talk to me about like where the line is? Like, is the bar so high now that we have to have, that we have to have professional editing and things like that, or can people DIY? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So all hope is not lost. If you want to build a YouTube channel without hiring an editor, having branded motion graphics, stuff like that, you can still do it. Especially if you have unique brilliance, a funny humor, you're very funny, or you have a particularly charismatic personality. If you have those things going for you, you don't even have to do basic edits. A lot of times you can just turn on the camera and start talking, and you'll build an audience that way. If you don't feel like you have those things naturally in reserve, then some of the ways that you can still build a really effective YouTube channel without just going with over the top production value is by doing careful audience research, finding out on YouTube what are the things that your particular target audience is very interested in. There tends to be a few topics that they gravitate towards, that saying, meet your audience where they're at, not where you're at. So, and then once you understand that, spend some time packaging your ideas in a way that's going to be compelling to them. And I saw that you just had Jake Thomas on, and he's a master of that, of understanding how to package things. And if you just do that, you will win the click a lot of times, and you will, and that'll put you ahead of the vast majority of people who you're competing with, especially in a professional niche, with some exceptions. The competition, there might be a lot of people doing it, but the competition isn't that fierce. And so that's kind of the first step you can take to winning the click and getting people to pay attention to you. Then once you've won the click and you have people watching, you do need to be a little bit more intentional about how you structure your content. You don't want to ramble. You don't want to have long, drawn out intros. You don't want to go on tangents. You don't want to overwhelm people with information and just give them too much. There are some basic rules that you kind of should follow with your scripting to make sure that once you win that click and you have people watching, you don't lose them. You keep them watching for the whole video.
Right. And I think you guys call that the retention graph, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I know a little bit. I know a little bit about this.
You've been using.
I know enough to be dangerous with this. So no, not enough to actually do it properly. Okay. So you're talking about first off, basic audience research. You mentioned topics they gravitate towards. I'd like to ask you a little bit about how we can identify those, and then packaging in a way that's compelling. And check out the episode with Jake, which is wherever you found this episode. It's nearby, and he talked a lot about titles and packaging, and then when we're actually creating the content, being very intentional with it. Having a short intro and no tangents. Is that no tangents in the whole in the whole video? Because I'm just wondering, does that mean that long form doesn't work? Does that mean that it should be shorter form? Can you tell me a little bit about
that? So long form in terms of like, when you say short form, you mean like YouTube Shorts?
Well, so what I'm thinking is, right, when we pick a title, let's take today for an example. We're talking about how to crush YouTube, and so we pick a title, and now I know this is a live, so it's going to be a bit different. We are rolling. We're not able to edit it in post and change the way that we spoke, but we are going to go on tangents, and we probably already have gone on several tangents. So if I'm creating a YouTube video, if I'm creating a video specifically for YouTube, and let's say I'm doing editing and creating it in that way, does that mean that I shouldn't be creating a long form video of an hour long? That I should actually be keeping it to 10, 15 minutes or even less, even like 5 minutes, where I'm really condensing down so it's much shorter? How do you think about that?
That's what my experience is in. That's what we've been doing. I know that YouTube right now, like on one of our larger channels that we manage, I know that I just saw they have a podcasting tab. So I know that they're starting to double down on podcasting. I would imagine that the algorithm relating to really long form content that's like an hour plus, that's considered a podcast, it probably, my guess is it would work a little bit differently. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but my guess is it would work a little bit differently than the algorithm that most YouTubers are familiar with. So I can't speak to that effectively, but if you were asking for my advice and how I would try to build an audience on YouTube based on what I know, yes, I would strongly recommend that if you're podcasting, for example, you still continue to do that, maybe on a separate channel, maybe on a separate platform altogether, but then you make a point on YouTube to take the information that you get from any one podcast and string it together, edit it so it's strung together in a way where every point leads into the next point, and it's really easy for the audience to follow, and they don't feel like they clicked for one thing and then got another.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit like the highlights package for a football match or something. So
Sure.
that's what that sounds like to me, because in a way, a podcast episode is like a sequence of tangents, because you follow the strings, and it can end up being the, I would hope it ends up being an interesting conversation all around the topic. But sometimes we do go down rabbit holes, and quite often I very deliberately go down those rabbit holes because I'm interested in where those lead. But yeah, I think that when you talk about intentional and no tangents, that already sends a red flag to me about the type of content that I'm creating and putting up on YouTube, because I think that is going to be too long and too tangential for what you're talking about.
Well, and to be clear, it's people want to consume podcasts. So it's not to say that there's anything wrong with the podcast format. Just on YouTube, I do think that the most success that you're probably going to see with the algorithm is going to be if you do that. One example, I just realized just recently I noticed that this creator is doing this. Have you ever heard of The Future without an E at the end of it?
Yeah, I've had Chris Doe
on
the podcast. Yeah, great.
Oh yeah, Chris. Yeah, okay,
yeah.
Exactly. So one of the things that Chris is doing right now is he'll do like an interview, and it'll be really long, and then his team will go back and isolate parts of the interview that are self-contained, and then they'll take the time to create interesting motion graphics to demonstrate the ideas being discussed, and then they'll put that up as its own video. And I've noticed that those are doing really well on his channel, and they serve the purpose. It's a great strategy. They serve the purpose of not only performing well on their own as videos, but then getting people, when they watch it, recognize that it's part of a longer interview, and then they go and look for that interview on his channel and go and watch it. So that's kind of, I think he's using both strategies together, and if it's working for Chris, chances are it could probably work for you too. So you wouldn't necessarily have to go start another channel. You could maybe post your long form podcast on your YouTube channel, and then also have videos that are segments of it that are self-contained, that don't go on tangents, also as videos that you put up.
Right. And now I'm going to ask you, going back, you mentioned having a separate channel possibly. Would that be a separate channel? Would you have the what I think I might call the short form clips? Will I have those on a separate channel than the full podcast interviews?
I haven't tested this myself. The way I think about it is, when somebody discovers your YouTube channel and they watch a piece of your content, they're later going to finish or leave and go back to their homepage and be scrolling. When they're scrolling, they're going to see more of your content. The question is, does that content appeal to them the same way as the content that they watched before? And if it doesn't, they're not going to click. And if that happens at scale, then YouTube will not promote your content.
Right.
So you have to be thinking. You have to be thinking, with the content I plan on putting on this channel, after people come and watch one video, when they see my other videos in the feed, are they going to feel compelled to click on those and watch those as well? And if the answer is no, because they like getting ideas quickly, and they don't like to sit there and listen to a long interview. This is just something I'm guessing at. You'd have to use data to test this. Then yes, you would want to put those clips maybe on a separate channel. My guess is YouTube's algorithm is smart enough that it can, if you have some content that's popular with your audience and some content that's not, it'll do a really good job of just showing them the content that it thinks they're going to want to click on. It also understands their personal preferences and the type of stuff that they're interested in. So if you have some content on your channel that speaks to those personal preferences, it'll also then show that content to them to increase the likelihood that they click. You just want to make sure that the content of your channel gets for each viewer, gets them watching as much of it as possible. That should be your primary metric when you're deciding what to put on a channel and what to put on a separate channel.
Right. And this is where I think I've heard you talking about bingeable channels versus bingeable videos.
Yeah. So historically on YouTube, there wasn't a lot of competition. And so you could get on YouTube, you could hemorrhage videos, and the algorithm wasn't as refined as it is now. So you could get on YouTube, you could hemorrhage videos, find what hits, and it would get a ton of views. And the likelihood of something random hitting would work relatively well. That's why people who have been on YouTube with exceptions, most people who have been on YouTube and taken it seriously for a long time have these massive audiences, despite the fact that if you go and watch their content today, it's maybe not the most exceptional content on YouTube, because they were able to ride that wave. Now that's not so much the case. Repeat your question again. I'm sorry, I got lost in my backstory, and it's early here.
That's okay. I know your time zone or your daylight savings just kicked in. Where I want to go with this is I just want to ask, based on that, does that mean that we should be more discerning about the type of videos that we're making? Like, should we curate our content more and put up only super high quality stuff and not hit publish on the mediocre stuff?
Yes, absolutely. And one way you can do that, aside from insane production value, is just making sure that you understand the things that are important to your audience, and you're making videos that not only hit on those things that are important to the audience, but then when they click on them, they start to listen. The information that they're getting isn't just low value boilerplate stuff. It's insights that they really can't find anywhere else, especially for your audience, people who want to build authority in their industry. You need to have something about your content that makes it unique and stand out in the eyes of your audience today, with today's landscape. I think that's where I was going with my ramble before about how things used to work on YouTube.
Yeah. So if Chat GPT could write it, then it's not good enough to use as a script for a video, because that's going to be that generic boilerplate that you talked about. And don't get me wrong, I think that Chat GPT is a great tool that you can use.
It's amazing.
For a lot of very useful things. Typically writing your shitty first draft, as some people call it. But just be aware it is your first draft, not your publishable content. Okay, so I don't know about charismatic. I don't know if my humor translates also well. What was the third one that you mentioned earlier?
So unique force of brilliance, charismatic personality, and humor.
So unique force of brilliance.
For example, you had Peep Laja on, I believe, and he. I apologize, Peep, if I pronounce your name wrong. He came on and he spit hot fire. That episode was outstanding. It compelled me to comment on Twitter, I believe, about it, and that's what I mean by having unique brilliance. Justin Welsh, also, who's king on LinkedIn, he talks about this, how there's different types of content that you can make that's gonna appeal to people, and the most powerful one by far is essentially thought leadership, and that's what Peep had. He has experiences other people simply don't have, and so he's able to just turn on a camera and start talking, and people have rapt attention because they're not going to find that anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it's Pep Leia. I know, because
Pep Leia. I apologize. I didn't know. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm sure he gets that one a lot. I don't get people mispronouncing my name, just misspelling it. So I understand. Okay, so let's take somebody like me then, and I have a YouTube channel where I've got a lot of mediocre content on there. And it's the usual thing of it's been there for years. So it's been there. The content kind of meanders in terms of the subject matter and things like that, because, I was experimenting and hadn't kind of found my niche and things like that. Should I just go and wipe the slate clean and delete all that content? Is that what you recommend?
No, not necessarily. You should go through, first you should figure out this is why I talk about channel before videos. You should figure out what you want your channel to be about. And then you should make the conscious decision, looking at all your previous content, what's in alignment with that and what's not in alignment with that. And what's not in alignment with that, I would recommend taking off your channel. Then you have left the stuff that is in alignment with what you feel your value proposition of that channel is. Go through that and look for signs that a video is a strong video. And one of the primary signs of that is, did people subscribe when they watched? And so anything that doesn't feel like a strong video, then remove that as well. And so all you have left are these videos that are in alignment with the value proposition that you want your channel to have, and they're compelling to the audience, the target audience that you're going after. So then when a new member of that target audience comes into your sphere and they're doing that scroll, after they watch one of your videos, they're doing that scroll and they're starting to see your videos show up, every single video they click on, you know, with a high degree of certainty that they're going to find compelling. And so that's actually one of the things that people have been talking about in the community recently, how you can grow your YouTube channel by deleting videos. So you can actually take these videos that aren't in alignment with your target audience off of your channel, and all you have left is the cream of the crop that people do find compelling. And that will cause binge watching behavior, which the YouTube algorithm it's probably the #1 metric that it's looking for. And when it sees that, it'll then go out and find a whole bunch of people like those people and promote your content to them.
Right. And I mean, is it enough to just remove those videos, or do you need to tell YouTube in some way, you know, hey, there's been a whole bunch of changes to this channel, you should go and re-index it or whatever?
It's not Google. Despite being owned by Google, it's not Google. So you can just switch them to private, and that's enough.
That's
and
enough.
Then what's going to make the difference is over time, the new audience behavior that emerges as a result, the algorithm will recognize that, and you'll start to see a pickup in your channel.
Cool. So, okay, and then I'm still in two minds as to do I need this separate channel for the long form video? Like, for example, we're broadcasting now live stream, so this is by definition going to be a long form video with lots of tangents. Should this be on a completely separate channel to those shorts, those clips, and the kind of the highlights packages that we talked about?
Well, like I said, it's not something I have a lot of experience with, so you'd have to test. And you let data decide.
Right.
The fact that, you know, Chris Do has been doing this for a very long time, and he's very business minded, and he is very fact driven and data driven. So my guess is if he's doing that on the same channel, he's probably done a little bit of research. His team has done a little bit of research and looked at the data and determined that this is actually a decent strategy. The fact that they're from the exact same clip, and the content themselves, the value of the content and what you're essentially giving viewers is in perfect alignment. It's just one is long form and might go on some tangents and the other one isn't. That's probably sufficient to have, if I'm just based on my intuition giving you a response, that's probably sufficient to have them on the same channel and not need to separate them.
And I guess the final kind of technical question for you, well, actually, no, it's kind of two there. One is there a difference to YouTube in how it treats a live video to regular videos?
I think it promotes live videos, especially when they're live, more. Like they'll show up in your feed, and you know they have that like little red circle around them. We only have one client who does live streams, so we haven't spent a lot of time with it. But it's definitely something that YouTube wants you to do, and it definitely works to grow the channel, especially. And this is something I've talked about before on LinkedIn is doing live streams, especially once you have an audience. Doing live streams is one of the absolute best ways to sell people. Right. We see so many comments with buyer intent in live streams that our client does. So that's it's definitely should be part of your strategy.
Okay, so I want to switch back then to what you mentioned earlier. You mentioned your audience research, and I think this is a really key piece. Can you give a quick overview of how we can figure out what the topics are that people gravitate towards or that people are looking? Because I'm sure that this is quite YouTube specific, right?
Yes,
because it's video. It's not just regular search.
It's the short answer, the easy answer applies across probably any social media platform, and that's that you should make content. You should initially, if you're starting a brand new channel, ideally you'll go out and you'll do some research using data and looking at other similar channels and seeing what's resonating. Use that as kind of like your North Star, for what type of content you should begin with. But one of the best things you can do is just start making content, make as much as you can, see what resonates, and then use that to then hone in and start to make more content that's kind of peripheral to it, and related. Because that's probably, like I said earlier, audiences tend to have certain priorities in mind, and they share that in common. And as a result, certain videos, certain topics really appeal to them within that niche.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And one thing that we briefly mentioned before, and can you tell me, like, what are the major differences between the way that people use YouTube as users compared to the other social media channels? Because it is kind of like it's social media, but it's not really a social media channel. Can you tell me a little bit how you think about that?
So let me just give you the rundown of why I think YouTube is the best. And a lot of this is what separates it from other platforms. So first of all, it has evergreen content. And so you're able to make content that one time, and it will continue to get views ongoing. And there's no other platform that does that quite as reliably. It shows up on Google. It develops a parasocial relationship on a level that other platforms simply don't. Like Joe Rogan, for example, you can listen to Joe Rogan, or the most popular podcast out there, on Spotify all you want, but you're not going to feel quite as connected with him as someone else you watch on YouTube, where you actually see their face as you listen to them, and you sit there and watch it for long periods of time. It's more discoverable. Like we've been talking about, you'll have content that is targeting very specific priorities of your target audience, and YouTube's algorithm is designed to have these surface and show up for them. Your success compounds over time. You develop fans that will go through your entire back catalog and watch everything. So if a new person comes into your sphere, if you have a successful channel, everything gets a lift together. And then quality matters. People, like we've been talking about, if you are doing a better job of communicating and packaging, that'll get people to follow you. Whereas you can get away with a lot lower quality stuff on other platforms, and then it's stable and reliably predictable. And so how do people interact? And so I guess I didn't quite answer your question, but how is it different? People develop, probably the biggest point in there is the parasocial relationship. By watching you on a regular basis, especially if you have a format that's bingeable, where people keep coming back over and over to watch your videos, the connection that they feel with you is so much stronger than something that's maybe just primarily audio based, or even something that's video based, but it's much shorter, like TikTok. And so that's probably the single most defining characteristic, I would say, of the audience relationship to creators on YouTube. To give you an example, there are events. I'm drawing a blank on some of them, but like there's events where creators will go and their fans can come and visit them, and in person. And YouTube consistently, if people who have big YouTube followings, will have tons of people show up. And then just recently, TikTok did its first one or something. It started to do them. And one of the biggest problems was that nobody was showing up to meet these creators. These creators would have millions of followers, and people still wouldn't show up. And so I would say that probably the biggest definable characteristic of that relationship is the parasocial nature of it, where people feel really bonded to the creators that they watch.
Right. Really interesting. So the relationships, the evergreen content, which is something that, I think that there is something in the nature of authority type content that we have an advantage in, that most of the content that we create can be evergreen if we design it that way. And then the compounding effect. And I think that is just something that is natural to all of kind of building a body of work and content creation, is that there is a compounding effect. It grows and it grows and it grows. It's like I heard somebody say, what's the best way to sell a book is to write another book. It's kind of the same idea. And I know that might sound a little bit extreme, but they said it for a reason. So, okay, that's really interesting. And then the other thing is it doesn't feel like a regular social media channel, YouTube, because of that evergreen thing of the possibility of something being shown again later. Is there any kind of date-based advantage in the algorithm of something being more recent, or like will it show something from 2010 if it's 100% relevant?
Both, yes to both. So YouTube's algorithm does favor newer content, assuming that its quality is there. So if it has two comparable videos within a niche that are competing, one's newer, one's older, and they seem to have relatively similar metrics in terms of click-through rate, in terms of audience retention, yes, it'll prefer that, especially if you're in like a news-based niche where freshness is extremely important. If you report the news 5 days late, nobody cares, you know. But then at the same time, and this is true especially for a lot of niches on YouTube that are not quite as fun, that are not quite as entertainment based. So for a lot of businesses in their niches, somebody made a video. A lot of times if you go and search in your niche, you'll see someone made a video like 5 years ago about the basics of HR or something like that, and it's still it's up to like 200,000 views or 500,000 views or 1 million plus views, and it's still just holding that number one spot. So so yes to both. I don't know if that's confusing or not.
No, that's good. So let me, and I'm probably going to ask you to repeat yourself here. Let's say you're talking to somebody who is an expert in their field, hasn't done YouTube before, and is thinking about doing it. Where would you advise them to start?
If you're an expert in your field, do the things we've already discussed, where you're packaging it. Go back, watch the episode with Jake. Jake does a great job of talking about how to package with title and thumbnail your idea for any particular video. Get a bunch of videos out there and see what your audience is interested in, and then kind of use that to narrow your focus and double down on that direction, and then start making more of that content. That will, if you do it right, and you're doing a good job packaging, and you're doing a good job of scripting your content so that you're not losing people when they're watching, that will give you a very strong chance of starting to develop momentum on YouTube. And then once you feel like the algorithm is starting to show your stuff to more and more people, you have a good idea of what your audience is interested in, if you're starting to build momentum, then maybe go back, remove some of those videos that you did before where you were just testing the waters, and you have a YouTube channel. Then focus, continue to engage with your audience, communicate with them, use community posts. Everybody now has access to community posts to survey your audience on a regular basis, to get insight into what it is that are their priorities, who they are, what type of content they want to see. And
so is that a text post? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, community posts are just they're text based, but they also have it's kind of like your options on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can do like a poll, for example. You can post a picture. You can just post text. And it used to be that you had to have 500 subscribers in order to have access to it, but they recently made a change so that everybody has access to it. So that's a great tool, in addition to doing the things that we just talked about, where you're testing the waters with various videos and you're just making a bunch of content to see what sticks. Then also use that, once you start to get an audience, use that to get an insight into their brains and what do they want, what are they focused on, and between those two, you should be able to get going.
What about professional editing? Like, can somebody just flick record on their webcam and put something straight up, or do they have to go through the professional editing, the motion graphics and stuff that you talked about, B-roll, all that kind of stuff?
If you find yourself in the same niche as one of my clients, you're probably not gonna beat us. But you can, if you do the things that we've been talking about. No, you don't need to have a bunch of motion graphics. You don't need to have a bunch of editing. If you do a really good job, if you're a great speaker and you do a really good job of collecting your thoughts in advance and knowing exactly what you're going to say, and that it's high value for your audience, you can hit record. Doesn't matter what type of camera you have, just start talking. And people, make sure that it's structured well, make sure that you grab attention, make sure you give people a reason to keep watching at the beginning, so that you're not losing people. you don't have motion graphics to do that for you. That's one of the advantages of motion graphics. But then just stay on point and you will build an audience. I see people do it all the time. There's one guy, I can't remember his name. I was just looking at his channel, and he does minimal editing. He adds like the occasional B-roll clip, and that's about it. And his videos are like 30 minutes long, and he'll just sit there and talk, and people tune in to watch, in the hundreds of thousands. So it's definitely something that you can do. Just make sure that you're not wasting your audience's time. That's key. Like, figure out what your audience wants, give it to them every single time, and you will grow, even if you don't have all the bells and whistles.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to leave it on that topic. I ask the same question in every interview, and that is, what is the number one tip that you would give somebody who wants to build their authority?
To kind of what we've just been talking about, to make sure, if you want to build your authority on YouTube, make sure that you are in tune with your audience and what they want, and you're consistently delivering it, and you're doing it in a way that they find intriguing, so that they're going to click, and that is high value to them, so they're going to continue to watch all the way through. And that's not easy. Even if you're an expert, a lot of times you're up here and your audience is down here, and you're out of touch with where they're at. And so it takes time and experience to get to a point where you understand where they're at and how you can reach them in a way that they find very compelling.
Yeah. Cool. I think one of the words that you used there, I just want to pull on that thread a little bit. What is intriguing for you?
What's in for me personally?
No, like what is that when you say create content that's intriguing?
Yeah, again, it's understanding for your audience what's intriguing to them. So to give you an example, one of our clients is a lawyer. Their audience is just extremely interested in one particular part of their case, and that's a part that involves them getting paid lots of money. And so we have made videos that gravitate toward just that topic, and they consistently get clicks, they consistently get views, they consistently get the most engagement out of anything that we do, because the audience finds that, more than any other part of the process, the most intriguing.
That's a great example. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let me ask you about failure. Has there been a business mistake or failure that you've experienced yourself that you can tell us about, what you learned from it?
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I was in China for a decade. I lived over there, I spoke the language, and I eventually started a company. I did that for 7 years, and it was manufacturing footwear. And I experienced just about every problem that you can experience in a business. I was ripped off. I followed bad leads. I worked with the wrong partners. I had, shoddy product. The whole gamut of mistakes. It did get to the point where it was a 7-figure company. That sounds a lot more impressive than it actually was. The cost of goods sold was astronomical because we're making huge orders. But eventually I realized that I had followed the wrong path entirely. Not only was it not the cutting edge of business like I talked about before, but it also wasn't. I was not happy. I was not enjoying what I was doing, so I eventually shut it down. After I did the biggest project we had ever done, I shut the company down. I came back to the States, and I'm glad I did it. But was it wildly successful? Absolutely not.
And in the moment, did you wonder if that was the right thing to do, to shut it down, or were you I'm definitely sure that this needs to go?
I was positive. I finished the project. I looked at the prospect of doing the next one, and everything in me just said no. And I left. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, maybe this next question might provide some insight. Is there a business book or resource that's been important for you?
Several. One more recent one that I've read is $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi.
Mm-hmm.
And, everyone's talking. I'm sure a lot of people roll their eyes when they heard this, because everyone's talking about this book. But Alex Alex Hormozy, for me, he put in a lot of pieces into the puzzle that I didn't see before. I felt like I've been an entrepreneur for most of my professional life, and I know a lot about business, about my, my industry, but I still felt like there were some pieces missing. And him and that book in particular gave me those pieces to see like what's missing in order to create a company that's truly going to scale and have potential long term. Another one is, for people who are interested in YouTube, the YouTube Formula by Daryl Eves. That's a fantastic read. It's at a more advanced level, but if you want to read a book, there's a lot of really bad YouTube books out there. If you want to read a book that's actually a good YouTube book, YouTube Formula, Daryl Eves. Another one, if you're interested in storytelling, and obviously that's something of interest to me because I'm on YouTube. Secrets of Story by Matt Bird is one of the best books on story that I've ever come across. And if you want to understand all the intricacies of how to write fictional, entertaining style content that people are going to be moved by emotionally, Secrets of Story by Matt Bird. And then another business one is The Business of Expertise by David C. Baker. He's outstanding. I'm sure most who are listening to this have probably read that. And then the last one would probably be The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. Outstanding business book where he talks about.
I think that one's been recommended as well before. Yeah, I think all of those books have been recommended before, except for the YouTube Formula. But I'm going to put all of the links to those in the show notes as well for this episode. And what about fiction? Do you read fiction?
No, I enjoy science fiction. I've read very little fiction. The fiction I have read that I enjoyed was Dune, and then Orson Scott. What's his name? Orson Scott Weld or something like that.
Orson Scott Card.
Ender's Game and a card.
Yeah.
Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow.
Yeah.
Those were outstanding.
Those are great. Those are great. I really enjoyed those as well.
How about yourself? I don't know if do you ever have a guest flip the question on you? Have you ever shared what yours is?
I am a total sci-fi fantasy nerd, so I read way too much. I read like a book or two a week, which is kind of embarrassing, but that's I read way too much of that kind of stuff, like Brandon Sanderson and people like that. And Dune is one of my favorites as well, for sure. But Orson Scott Card, that whole series is very good. The Ender series, although it started to go a little bit, actually a bit like the Dune series. The later books started to become a little bit more weird as you go on. So, but there are more books in that series as well. So
that's why I stopped. I stopped at Ender's Shadow because I heard that. That's what I heard from people.
That is a great book though. That second book, Ender's Shadow. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, and thank you for flipping the question. So
yeah, absolutely.
So, Cyan, if people are interested in learning more about you and maybe checking out your YouTube agency, where can they find more?
I am exclusively posting on LinkedIn at this point. It's the only place I'm active. So just search for my name, Cyan Cooper, on LinkedIn. You'll find me. I think I'm the only Cyan on the entire platform. Definitely the only Cyan Cooper. And I do plan, I do have, it is in the works to start doing a whole lot more thought leadership in the YouTube space in the future. So if this is something that you're interested in and you want to get the rest of what's in my brain, be sure to follow me and you won't be disappointed. I promise.
Yeah, and I'm going to link your profile in the show notes, and I do recommend people check out your post because I've been following it for a while. So ever since you first commented on one of my podcast episodes back in like episode 15 or something, I've been following you since then. And even though I haven't really been actively thinking about YouTube all that much, I still enjoy the posts that you're putting up. They're really, really useful and insightful. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and that's it. It's been great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming in and sharing your knowledge with us.
My pleasure.
And if you want, you can check out the podcast episode with Jake Thomas. We referred to that, and that will be, I think, episode 108 or 109 of the podcast. If you want to look for that. So, thanks for listening, and see you next time.